The air in the Bayou hung thick and heavy, not just with the oppressive humidity of a Louisiana summer in 1833, but with something far more palpable, a silence that felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence of dread. It clung to the cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, seeped into the murky waters, and nestled deep within the hearts of those who whispered of the St. Jude's choir. Have you ever felt a silence so profound, so utterly devoid of life, that it screams louder than any shriek? This, my friends, was that silence. A quiet born not of peace, but of profound, inexplicable horror. It was said the wind itself avoided the old, crumbling brick edifice of the St. Jude's Asylum for the infirm and spiritually bereft, a place long shrouded in local superstition and fear, built on a desolate stretch of land far from the bustling heart of New Orleans. St. Jude's was an anomaly, even in a region that embraced the eccentric. Officially, it was a sanctuary for those whose minds had frayed under the relentless sun and the weight of forgotten sins. Unofficially, it was where inconvenient truths were buried, where whispers went to die, and where, just 6 weeks prior, a choir of 53 souls had, inexplicably, sung themselves into oblivion. My name is Alistair Finch. I am, or rather, I was, a cartographer, a man who dealt in lines and logic, in the tangible contours of the world. But the map of St. Jude's, etched not in ink but in the chilling testimonies of a few terrified survivors, defied all logic. It began, as many such stories do, with an invitation, not a formal summons, but a plea, delivered by a man named Elias Thorne, a junior clerk from the Louisiana Department of Health. Thorne was a pallid, nervous sort, his eyes darting like trapped birds, his voice a reedy whisper that suggested a perpetual state of fear. He spoke of an unprecedented medical anomaly, a spiritual affliction, but the terror in his voice betrayed the clinical detachment he attempted to project. He offered a sum of money that, frankly, was scandalous for a simple cartographer, especially one tasked with creating a detailed survey of the asylum's grounds and internal structures for future expansion. But it wasn't the money that piqued my interest. It was the frantic desperation in Thorne's eyes, the unspoken plea for someone, anyone, to look beyond the official reports. They just stopped. Thorne had stammered, in my modest New Orleans office, clutching a sweat-stained handkerchief. Him, every last one of them. No struggle, no outward sign of distress. They simply, ceased. My initial thought was some form of mass poisoning, perhaps a contaminated batch of sacrament wine, or a localized disease. But Thorne had insisted otherwise. The autopsies, conducted hastily and with a palpable reluctance by the local parish doctor, a Dr. Beaumont, had yielded nothing conclusive. No poison, no immediate cause of death. Just 53 bodies, sprawled in the chapel, faces serene, almost beatific, as if wrapped in the final moments of a divine crescendo. It was a macabre tableau, described by the handful of asylum staff, who witnessed it as a peaceful passing, a miracle of God's grace. But Thorne's tremor suggested otherwise, and my cartographer's mind, trained to seek patterns, to connect disparate points, saw only a vast, terrifying blank space where an explanation should have been. So, I accepted, not for the money, or at least, not just for the money, a primal curiosity, a stubborn refusal to accept the neatly packaged, utterly unbelievable official narrative, gnawed at me. I arrived at St. Jude's on a stifling Tuesday morning, the air thick with the scent of stagnant water and decay. The gates, once grand retired, hung askew on rusted hinges, like the maw of some ancient, toothless beast. The gravel path leading to the main building was choked with weeds, and the once manicured gardens were now a tangle of overgrown vines and forgotten blossoms. The place exuded an aura of abandonment, despite the faint murmur of activity from within. Dr. Beaumont, the parish doctor responsible for the dubious autopsies, greeted me at the imposing oak doors. He was a portly man, his face a ruddy map of burst capillaries, his eyes perpetually bloodshot. He smelled faintly of cheap tobacco, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet that I couldn't quite place. His welcome was cool, almost hostile, despite the official nature of my visit. "Mr. Finch, I presume." His voice was raspy, laced with an irritation he barely bothered to conceal. The cartographer, a strange profession for such a task, wouldn't you say? One might argue a fresh perspective is precisely what's needed. "Doctor," I replied, forcing a polite smile. "My aim is merely to document the physical layout. Anything beyond that is a byproduct of thoroughness." He grunted, leading me inside. The interior of St. Jude's was even more oppressive than its exterior. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust, mildew, and something else, a faint, sweet, cloying aroma that pricked at the back of my throat. The main hall was dimly lit, light struggling to penetrate the grimy windows. Shadows danced in the corners, morphing into grotesque shapes that seemed to watch us. There was a palpable quiet here, too different from the silence outside. This was an institutional quiet, the kind enforced by strict rules and a pervasive, invisible dread. The floorboards creaked under our weight, each sound echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. "The chapel is through here," Beaumont said, gesturing down a long, dark corridor. His voice, for all its gruffness, held a subtle tremor as he spoke of the chapel. "That is where the incident occurred. WEVE sealed it off. For now, pending further investigation, of course." His emphasis on "of course" felt entirely unconvincing. "And the patients?" I inquired, trying to sound casual. "Are they aware of what happened?" Beaumont scoffed. "Aware? Most of them wouldn't know their own names, Mr. Finch. They are, for the most part, simpletons, or lost souls too far gone to comprehend such events. We've told them the choir was relocated, a new mission, a divine calling. You understand." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Easier for them, easier for everyone. As we walked, I noticed something peculiar. Despite the general state of disrepair, there were sections of the walls that appeared freshly plastered, almost too clean, and a faint, metallic temps, almost like blood, seemed to mingle with the cloying sweetness in the air. My cartographer's instincts, trained to observe every minute detail, were already screaming. This wasn't just an asylum, it was a tomb, and the truth, I suspected, was far more monstrous than a choir simply singing themselves to death. What horrors, I wondered, did those freshly plastered walls conceal, and what unspeakable secret lay behind the sealed doors of the chapel? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Louisiana heat, a premonition that my map of St. Jude's would be drawn, not just with lines and measurements, but with the chilling contours of human depravity and the silent screams of the dead. I had a feeling that this journey, far from being a simple mapping exercise, was about to lead me into the darkest corners of the human soul. And I wondered, dear reader, if you are prepared to join me on this descent. The path ahead is unclear, shrouded in shadow, and promises only more unsettling revelations. The chill that snaked through me as Dr. Beaumont led the way to the chapel had nothing to do with the Louisiana heat. It was the icy touch of foreboding, a premonition that the very air within St. Jude's held a terrible secret. Every creak of the floorboards echoed the frantic beat of my own heart, each shadow seeming to twist and writhe with unseen malevolence. Beaumont's lumbering gait was oddly silent on the aged wood, as if he'd mastered the art of ghosting through these halls, a skill born of long acquaintance with its unsettling quiet. The smell, I began, trying to keep my voice even. "It's quite distinct, a combination of sweet and something else, Beaumont grunted, not bothering to turn. "Old building, damp, and the infirm, they have their own. Effluvia, nothing out of the ordinary, Mr. Finch. You'll get accustomed to it." His dismissive tone did little to assuage my growing unease. The something else was a metallic temps, faint but persistent, reminiscent of dried blood, though I dismissed the thought as my imagination working overtime in this oppressive environment. Yet it persisted, a faint whisper against the cloying sweetness. We reached a heavy wooden door at the end of the corridor. It was thick, scarred, and looked far older than the freshly plastered walls around it. A rusted padlock, absurdly large, hung from a heavy iron staple. Beaumont fumbled with a ring of keys, the jingle echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. As he unlocked it, a faint, sweet aroma, more intense here, wafted out, momentarily overpowering the musty air of the corridor. It was sickly sweet, almost floral, yet deeply unsettling, like the scent of decaying lilies on a coffin. "This is it," Beaumont muttered, pushing the door open with a reluctant shove. The hinges groaned, a sound like a dying gasp. The chapel was a mausoleum of light. High arched windows, caked with years of grime and draped with moth-eaten velvet, admitted only slivers of diffused light, creating long, distorted shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the dust-laden pews. The air was heavy, still, as if no breath had stirred it since the moment of catastrophe, and the smell. Here, it was overwhelming. The cloying sweetness was paramount, mixed with that faint, metallic undercurrent, and something else, a deep, earthy scent, like disturbed soil or decaying organic matter. It made the hairs on my arms stand on end. My eyes swept across the scene, trying to reconcile Thorne's hushed terror with Beaumont's casual dismissal. The chapel was undeniably empty now. The 53 bodies, as Thorne had explained, had been removed. Yet, the presence of what had occurred lingered, a ghostly imprint on the very fabric of the room. I could almost hear the last notes of that doomed choir, their voices rising, then abruptly, chillingly, ceasing. "This is where they, sang Beaumont said, his voice unusually subdued. He gestured vaguely towards a raised platform at the front, where a simple wooden altar stood, flanked by 2 rows of empty hymnal stands. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light, like lost souls. They were arrayed here, you see, men on one side, women on the other, all facing the altar. I walked slowly down the aisle, my boots disturbing the thick layer of dust on the floor. Each step raised a tiny puff, releasing more of that disturbing aroma. The pews were old, scarred, some of the wooden benches showing faint, darker stains, perhaps water damage, perhaps something else. My cartographer's eye, trained to pick up details, noted the faint indentations on the floor where the pews had been shifted, then shifted back. But why? Were there any instruments? I asked, looking around for an organ or a piano. "No," Beaumont replied, joining me at the front. "Te sang a cappella." Their voices, they say, were remarkable, heavenly, some called them, drawn from the best of our patients, those with a particular affinity for the divine. It was part of their therapy, you see, to uplift their spirits. The very thought seemed grotesque in this chilling space, and how exactly did they sing themselves to death? I pressed, turning to face him. His eyes, usually shifty, were fixed on the empty space where the choir would have stood. Beaumont sighed, running a hand over his balding head. "No one truly knows, Mr. Finch. The official report states cardiac arrest due to unknown causes, possibly exacerbated by spiritual fervor. A medical convenience, you understand. The staff who witnessed it, they spoke of a sudden silence. One moment, glorious song. The next, utter stillness. And then, the collapse. All at once. All at once." I questioned, picking up a stray brittle piece of parchment from the floor. It was a fragment of a hymnal page, the ink faded, bearing a few lines of a mournful tune. No screams, no struggles, no one tried to help. None. Those few staff members present, the nurses and an orderly or two, they were in shock. They described it as a cessation, not an event, as if the life simply left them, like a candle snuffing. They said their faces were serene, peaceful, almost joyful. Beaumont's voice had dropped to a near whisper, a tone I hadn't heard from him before. He sounded, for the first time, genuinely disturbed. I knelt, examining the floor more closely. The dust was thickest here, undisturbed in most places, but near the altar, where the choir would have been, there were faint scuff marks, barely perceptible. And then I saw it. A dark, almost black stain on the wooden floorboard, partially obscured by dust, near where one of the hymnal stands might have been. It was roughly circular, about the size of a man's palm. I touched it. It was dry, but the wood felt oddly rough, as if it had been bleached or corroded, and the smell, that faint metallic temps, was stronger here. "What is this?" I asked, pointing to the stain. Beaumont bent down, peering at it through narrowed eyes. "Just a stain, Mr. Finch. Perhaps a spilled candle, or some old water damage. This place is ancient." But his voice lacked conviction. He straightened up quickly, almost too quickly. "It doesn't look like water damage, Doctor, and it smells metallic." He shrugged, feigning indifference. "The chapel saw much use. Perhaps something from the old sacramental wine, perhaps." I didn't believe him for a second. Sacramental wine didn't corrode wood like this, nor did it smell faintly of blood. My eyes scanned the area around the stain. Then I noticed another, and another, faint dark circles, appearing randomly spaced, almost as if— "Dr. Beaumont," I said, rising slowly, my gaze fixed on the pattern emerging before me. "How many patients were in the choir?" 53, as I told you. "And how many of these stains are there?" I walked carefully, counting them, my heart thumping, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. 1, 2, 3. They were roughly circular, just as I'd observed, and positioned with an eerie regularity. They weren't random spills. They were specific. My count reached 53. 53 circular stains, arrayed precisely where a choir might stand, each one approximately the size of a human palm, and each emanating that faint, metallic scent. And one, just one, seemed to have a faint, almost invisible, reddish-brown smear leading from it, as if something had been dragged. "These aren't candle wax, Dr. Beaumont," I stated, my voice low. "These are footfalls, or rather, where someone's foot rested, and whatever was on that foot, it left this residue. 53 of them. Exactly the number of your choir members." Beaumont's face paled, the ruddy complexion draining to a sickly gray. He didn't speak, merely stared at the floor, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "And this," I continued, pointing to the faint smear, "this looks like a drag mark, as if something was pulled away. What exactly happened here, Doctor? What did they sing? And what, precisely, was the spiritual fervor that left these marks on the floor?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Beaumont looked like a cornered animal, his chest heaving. The sickly sweet scent in the air suddenly felt less like decaying lilies and more like an invisible poison, seeping into my very bones. What unspeakable ritual, I wondered, could leave such an imprint? And why did Dr. Beaumont, the man who had signed off on their deaths, seem so terrified of its residue? The answer, I knew, lay hidden not just in the past, but in the very walls of this asylum. What monstrous truth, dear reader, do you believe these stains signify? The air here feels thick with unspoken horrors, and I can assure you, the secrets of St. Jude's are only just beginning to unravel. The tension in the chapel was a tangible thing, a suffocating shroud woven from unspoken fears and the lingering scent of that sickly sweet metallic aroma. Dr. Beaumont's face was an open book of terror, every line etched with a horror he couldn't, or wouldn't, articulate. My question hung in the air, echoing the chilling silence that had swallowed the St. Jude's choir. What, precisely, was the spiritual fervor that left 53 circular stains on the chapel floor? I don't know, Beaumont stammered, his gaze darting around the chapel as if expecting some unseen specter to emerge from the shadows. His usual gruffness had vanished, replaced by a raw vulnerability. It was beyond comprehension. A divine event, as the Mother Superior insisted. Divine events don't typically leave corrosive stains on floorboards. Doctor, I countered, my voice sharper than I intended. The cartographer in me was furious at the obfuscation, at the deliberate blindness to the physical evidence staring us in the face. And they certainly don't involve dragging bodies. I pointed again to the faint smear on the floor, the only disruption in the otherwise pristine pattern of dust. Beaumont flinched, his eyes fixed on the mark. No bodies were dragged, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. They were, carried, gently, to the mortuary, with reverence. Reverence that leaves a drag mark, I scoffed. And what of these stains? What were they standing in? What was on their feet that corroded the wood? He wrung his hands, his breath coming in shallow gasps. It was, a ritual, a special ceremony, for the more, devout, to cleanse them, to prepare them for God's grace. He spoke in halting phrases, like a man reciting a script he barely understood, or one he desperately wished to forget. A cleansing ritual. My mind reeled. The idea of a religious rite, leaving behind such a disturbing residue, coupled with the mass, simultaneous deaths, was profoundly unsettling. What kind of ritual involves 53 people standing in something that corrodes wood? Beaumont finally met my gaze, and in his eyes, I saw not just fear, but a profound, deep-seated revulsion. It was water. Holy water, specially prepared, blessed. It was meant to purify. His voice was barely a whisper now, thick with a desperate plea for me to believe him. Holy water, I repeated, incredulous, that leaves this kind of mark, and causes 53 people to drop dead simultaneously. It was concentrated, he mumbled, looking away. The Mother Superior, she believed. Stronger piety required stronger measures. A more potent conduit for divine purification. Concentrated holy water. The phrase was absurd, yet in the grim context of this asylum, it felt chillingly plausible. In its fanaticism, my thoughts immediately drifted to the possibility of a corrosive acid, disguised as a religious sacrament. This was no spiritual affliction. This was a deliberate act, masked by zealotry. But why? What could possibly be the motive for such a horrific act? Who prepared this holy water? I pressed. And where are the vessels, the basins, the source of this concentrated purity? Beaumont shook his head vehemently. I don't know. The Mother Superior oversaw it all. She was very, particular. No one else was permitted in the preparation area. It was her sacred duty. And where is the Mother Superior now? She departed shortly after the incident, he said, his voice regaining a touch of its earlier dismissiveness, though tinged with something akin to relief. Devastated, of course. She left the asylum in the care of her most trusted subordinates. Said her work here was done, and God called her to a new mission. Departed, a convenient exit, I thought, for the architect of such a catastrophe. The more Beaumont spoke, the clearer the picture became. A twisted form of religious extremism, resulting in a mass death, covered up by institutional authority. The idea of unethical scientific medical practices now seemed to merge seamlessly with religious fanaticism, a terrifying synergy under the guise of piety. And who are these trusted subordinates? I asked, looking around the desolate chapel. There's Father Michael, the chaplain, and Sister Agnes, the head nurse. They manage the day-to-day, but the true authority, the one who knows everything, She's gone. He waved a dismissive hand, clearly hoping to close the topic, but I wasn't done. My eyes caught on something else near the altar, partially hidden behind a forgotten, overturned needler. A small, tarnished silver locket. It was open, and inside, nestled against a faded silk lining, was a miniature portrait of a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a faint, almost melancholic smile. She wore a simple, dark dress. "What's this?" I asked, picking it up carefully. Beaumont squinted. "A locket. Must belong to one of the choir members. Probably fell during the commotion." He made a move to take it from me, but I held it firmly. "Do you recognize her?" He shook his head. "Hard to say. Many faces came and went through these doors, most of them forgotten." But his gaze lingered on the locket for a fraction of a second longer than was necessary. A fleeting hesitation I didn't miss. I closed the locket, slipping it into my pocket. A small, personal item easily overlooked by those eager to erase any trace of the tragedy. Perhaps a clue, a thread to pull. "Well, Dr. Beaumont," I said, turning away from the altar and surveying the chapel one last time, "this detailed survey will require more than a casual glance. I'll need complete access to the asylum's records, patient manifests, staff logs, supply inventories, everything. And I'll need to speak with Father Michael and Sister Agnes, and any staff member who was present in this chapel that day." Beaumont's face contorted, a mixture of exasperation and thinly veiled alarm. "That will be difficult. The records are extensive, and the staff, they are still quite traumatized. Then their testimony will be all the more valuable," I stated firmly. "My work here is not merely to draw lines on a page, Doctor. It is to understand the spaces between them, and these spaces, in this chapel, are screaming." He sighed, defeated. "Very well, Mr. Finch. I will inform Father Michael and Sister Agnes of your extended requirements. But I assure you, you will find nothing more than what has already been reported. A divine, if tragic, passing." As we left the chapel, the heavy door groaning shut behind us, the oppressive quiet of St. Jude's seemed to settle around me once more. The cloying sweet smell, however, persisted, clinging to my clothes, my hair, even my very skin. It was the scent of a hidden atrocity, a grim testament to the horrors that unfolded here. I knew, with an unsettling certainty, that the holy water story was a carefully constructed facade. What, then, was the truth? And what depths of depravity would I have to plumb to unearth it? This locket, this small, intimate relic, felt like the first real lead in a labyrinth of deceit. Are you, my friends, still brave enough to navigate this dark maze with me? The asylum's true history is only just beginning to reveal its terrifying face. The locket felt heavy in my pocket, a small anchor against the unsettling tide of Dr. Beaumont's evasiveness and the suffocating atmosphere of St. Jude's. His fear, more than his words, convinced me that the holy water story was a pathetic lie, a thin veil over something truly monstrous. My cartographer's instinct, honed by years of discerning truth from deceptive lines on a map, screamed that I was standing at the threshold of a meticulously crafted illusion. "I will arrange for your access to the records," Beaumont conceded, his voice tight. "And you may speak with Father Michael and Sister Agnes. But understand, Mr. Finch, this is a house of God. Our patients are vulnerable. We ask for discretion." The thinly veiled threat was clear. Dig too deep, and you might disturb more than dust. Leaving the chapel, the oppressive silence of the main hall seemed to deepen. I could almost hear the asylum itself holding its breath, guarding its secrets. Beaumont led me to a small Spartan room designated as my temporary office. It contained a rickety table, 2 worn chairs, and a single flickering oil lamp that cast more shadows than light. "The records will be brought to you here," he announced, before making a hasty retreat, leaving me alone with the ghosts of St. Jude's. As the heavy door clicked shut, sealing me in, I pulled out the locket. The young woman's portrait stared up at me, her eyes holding a faint, unreadable sorrow. Who was she? Was she one of the 53? A victim, or somehow, a key to understanding what happened? The locket's tarnished silver felt cool against my palm, a tiny piece of tangible humanity in a place stripped bare of it. I vowed to find out her name. My first task was to begin my physical survey, a pretext for deeper investigation. Armed with my measuring tape, compass, and notebook, I moved through the asylum's corridors. The building was a labyrinth of echoing halls, locked cells, and dimly lit common rooms. The few patients I encountered were spectral figures, shuffling past with vacant stares or huddled in corners, muttering to themselves. Their eyes, when they met mine, held a disturbing blend of fear and resignation. They were shells, emptied of all will, and I wondered if the same fate awaited anyone who dared to scratch beneath St. Jude's pious facade. I noted the fresh plasterwork that had caught my eye earlier. In several sections of the long corridors, leading away from the chapel, patches of wall were conspicuously newer. The paint a slightly different shade, the mortar still smelling faintly of lime. It was as if certain sections had been hastily repaired, or, more disturbingly, sanitized. What evidence, I mused, had been so urgent to conceal? My mapping notes now included not just dimensions, but observations on the quality of mortar, the age of plaster, and the patterns of wear on the floorboards. Later that afternoon, a young, nervous orderly delivered a stack of dusty ledgers and brittle scrolls to my room. The patient manifests and some supply logs. "Sir," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. Father Michael said these were all that were readily available. His eyes, however, darted quickly to the locket, which I had placed on the table, before he hurried away. A flicker of recognition, or just curiosity. The ledgers were a chronicle of despair. Names, dates of admission, diagnoses often vague and terrifyingly broad. Melancholia, hysteria, spiritual affliction, moral insanity. Most patients listed were poor, friendless, or inconvenient. They were the forgotten, easily silenced. I scanned the names, looking for any that might match the young woman in the locket, though I had no name to search. The supply logs were even more revealing. Pages upon pages, detailing deliveries of basic foodstuffs, medical supplies, and then, jarringly, a series of recurring entries over the past 2 years. Concentrated purification solution, via special order. Unmarked vessels, and directly below it, entries for high-grade linseed oil and industrial solvent. Linseed oil was often used as a binder in paints, and solvents for cleaning. But why so much? And why paired with a purification solution that sounded suspiciously like Beaumont's concentrated holy water? My mind raced. A corrosive liquid, applied to the feet. A mass, simultaneous collapse. The stench of decay in that sickly sweet aroma, now identified in the chapel. This wasn't holy water. This was poison. A slow-acting, or perhaps rapidly debilitating, poison that caused paralysis or cardiac arrest, its effects masked by a facade of spiritual ecstasy. And the linseed oil and solvent, for cleaning up the aftermath, erasing the telltale stains from the wooden floor. This was no accident. It was a premeditated, systematic murder, cloaked in religious dogma. As I pondered this grim realization, a soft knock came at my door. "Mr. Finch, it is Sister Agnes." I opened the door to find a woman of indeterminate age standing before me. Sister Agnes was gaunt, her face a roadmap of sharp angles, framed by a tightly bound wimple. Her eyes, however, were disturbingly bright, almost feverish, and held an intensity that belied her frail frame. There was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. "Dr. Beaumont informed me of your presence," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, though thin, like stretched wire, "and your interest in our recent sorrow." My deepest condolences, sister, I offered. Stepping aside to invite her in, she entered, her gaze sweeping over the room, pausing briefly on the locket, then settling on my face. God's will is mysterious, Mr. Finch. Sometimes, His blessings come in forms we do not understand. Indeed, I replied, choosing my words carefully. I am trying to understand the circumstances surrounding the choir's passing, the stains in the chapel, the reports of a concentrated purification solution in your supply logs, and the immediate departure of the Mother Superior. It paints a rather grim picture, sister. Her eyes narrowed, and a flicker of something, perhaps defiance, or perhaps fear, crossed her face. Our Mother Superior was a woman of profound faith. Her methods, while perhaps unconventional, were always for the spiritual betterment of our charges. The purification solution was a sacred preparation, blessed by her own hands, designed to draw the faithful closer to divine grace. And it caused 53 people to die, I asked, pushing the point. Sister Agnes stiffened. They did not die, Mr. Finch. They ascended. Their souls purified were called home by the Almighty. It was a miracle of transfiguration, witnessed by those chosen to observe. Her voice had taken on a fervent, almost hypnotic quality, her eyes fixed on some distant, unseen point. She truly believed it. Or, she was a terrifyingly good actress. And who were these chosen observers? I inquired, my mind racing. If this was a mass murder, there had to be complicity, a shared delusion, or coercion. Only those of unwavering faith, she intoned. A few of the most devout nurses, and Father Michael, of course. They understood the divine purpose, and the locket, sister. I picked it up from the table. Do you recognize this young woman? Sister Agnes took the locket from my hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Her eyes widened, and for a fleeting moment, the fervent mask slipped, revealing a flash of raw, unadulterated grief. Amelia, she whispered, her voice cracking. Sweet Amelia. She had the voice of an angel, the most beautiful among them. A single tear, crystalline and stark, tracked a path down her gaunt cheek. Amelia was part of the choir. I pressed gently. She nodded, tears now flowing freely. Yes, she was a recent admission, sent by her family, for her melancholia. But the Mother Superior saw great potential in her voice, a true gift from God, and she died in the chapel. I finished, the implication hanging heavy between us. Sister Agnes clutched the locket to her chest, her earlier piety momentarily shattered by genuine sorrow. She transcended, she corrected, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. She looked utterly lost, a woman caught between her unwavering faith and the undeniable, horrifying reality of Amelia's death. Sister Agnes, I said, my voice low and earnest, I believe Amelia and the others did not transcend. I believe they were poisoned, and I believe the Mother Superior engineered it. If you have any information, any doubt, any truth to share, now is the time. For Amelia's sake. She stared at me, her eyes wide and haunted. The silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken words, with the weight of a horrific truth, struggling to break free from the chains of dogma. The locket, held tightly in her trembling hand, was a silent testament to a life tragically cut short. I could see the conflict warring within her, faith versus truth, devotion versus conscience. And in that moment, I knew I had found not just a witness, but perhaps a misguided believer, caught in a web of unspeakable evil, now teetering on the precipice of revealing it all. What hidden depths of this sacred preparation would Sister Agnes unwittingly expose, and how much more complicity, my dear readers, lurked within the walls of this terrifying asylum. The night, I suspected, was far from over. The silence in the room stretched, thick with unspoken words, with the weight of a horrific truth struggling to break free from the chains of dogma. Agnes clutched Amelia's locket, her knuckles white, her face a mask of profound conflict. The zealous glint in her eyes had been momentarily eclipsed by a raw, human grief, a flicker of conscience struggling against years of indoctrination. I pressed gently, sensing the delicate balance. "Sister Agnes," I repeated, my voice low and earnest. "Amelia deserved more than a convenient narrative of transcendence. If you truly believe in God's justice, then you must believe in truth. What do you know about the Mother Superior's sacred preparation?" She looked at the locket, then back at me, her eyes clouded with anguish. She called it the chorus sanctorum," Sister Agnes whispered, her voice barely audible, as if the words themselves were forbidden. "The choir of saints. It was her life's work. She believed a human voice, perfectly tuned to the divine, could achieve a state of pure spiritual resonance. A resonance so profound, it would draw the soul directly to God, bypassing the pain of earthly purgatory and the purification solution." I pressed, my mind connecting the dots between religious fervor and grim reality. "It was meant to aid the resonance," she confessed, her voice thick with dread, "to amplify the spiritual frequency. The Mother Superior said it cleansed the body of earthly impurities, making it a pure vessel for the soul's ascent. She prepared it herself. Old dispensary, deep beneath the west wing. No one was allowed near." My cartographer's mind immediately pictured the asylum's layout. The west wing. That would explain the fresh plaster in the corridors leading from it. A secluded, hidden area for a secret, deadly operation. And what exactly was this solution composed of? I asked, though I already had a terrifying suspicion. Sister Agnes shook her head, tears welling again. I don't know the exact components." She spoke of rare herbs, blessed waters, and a special mineral. "Something brought from deep within the earth," she said, "that possessed unique spiritual conductivity. But the smell, it was like sweet almonds, and it burned." She rubbed her hands compulsively, as if trying to wash away an invisible residue. Sweet almonds and a burning sensation. The chilling familiarity of those descriptors sent a jolt of recognition through me. Cyanide, a swift, devastating poison, often possessing a bitter almond scent, though some described it as sweet, and known for its rapid, silent effect on the human body, causing cardiac arrest. The special mineral was likely a cover for a readily available, deadly chemical, probably smuggled in. And the spiritual resonance was simply a euphemism for suffocation and death. "She made them drink it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sister Agnes nodded, her eyes wide with remembered horror. "No, not drink. They were instructed to stand, barefoot on cloths saturated with the solution, for prolonged periods. During their most intense rehearsals, she claimed the feet were direct conduits to the soul, that the impurities could be drawn out through the souls. The singing was to heighten their spiritual focus, to aid the ascension process. It was all part of the sacred ritual of the chorus sanctum, standing barefoot on saturated cloths. The 53 circular stains on the chapel floor, the faint drag mark, the corrosive effect on the wood, the metallic temps, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The holy water was poison, absorbed through the skin, amplified by the exertion of singing. The dragging of a body, one that perhaps resisted, or was moved prematurely, explaining the single smear. And the silence, Thorne described, the simultaneous collapse, a mass poisoning, engineered by a religious fanatic, using her victim's faith against them. So the Mother Superior wasn't just directing a choir. "Sister," I said, the grim truth settling heavily upon me. "She was conducting a mass murder, and you, and Dr. Beaumont, and Father Michael were complicit in its cover-up." Sister Agnes recoiled, clutching the locket even tighter. "No, we did not know. We believed she was a woman of God. She spoke of visions, of divine instruction. We thought it was a miracle, Mr. Finch, a true ascent. Her voice rose, raw with desperation, cracking with the weight of her sudden, dawning horror. When they fell, so peacefully, we thought God had truly taken them. We saw their serene faces. We believed. Her anguish seemed genuine. She wasn't an architect of this evil, but a deeply misguided believer, manipulated by a charismatic, psychopathic zealot. This realization offered a glimmer of hope. If she could be convinced of the truth, she might become an ally. Sister Agnes, I said, my tone compassionate yet firm. This was not a miracle. It was a chemical reaction, a poison, and the Mother Superior fled because she knew what she had done. You must tell me everything you remember about her, about this solution, and about the process. For Amelia, for all 53 of them. She wept, quiet, desperate sobs shaking her frail frame. She brought the liquid in thick, dark glass bottles, unmarked. She would transfer it to large, shallow basins in the chapel, just before the rehearsals, and she insisted on absolute secrecy. Said only those of pure faith could witness the purification. Everyone else was dismissed. And the special mineral, I prompted. Did she ever describe it? Only that it glowed faintly. In the dark, Sister Agnes whispered, a haunted look in her eyes. And that it came from the earth. A gift from God, she called it, to accelerate the ascension. A mineral that glowed faintly. My mind immediately leaped to phosphorescence, often associated with certain minerals, like radium, or perhaps a more common element that had been chemically treated. Whatever it was part of the deadly cocktail. The Mother Superior was clearly more than just a religious fanatic. She was a twisted alchemist of death. Where is this old dispensary? I asked, my gaze hardening. And where are those unmarked bottles, the basins, the cloths? We need to find them. Sister Agnes looked terrified. The Mother Superior. She ordered everything purged after the ascension. She said the vessels were too sacred for earthly touch, that they had to be returned to the earth, or purified by fire. She oversaw their destruction herself. The dispensary was sealed after. She claimed its sanctity had been compromised, destroyed, purified by fire, sealed, more evidence of a meticulously planned cover-up. The Mother Superior had erased her tracks with chilling precision, but even the most meticulous criminal leaves a trace. The sweet almond smell lingered, the stains remained, and now, Sister Agnes, a broken vessel of misplaced faith, was cracking. The dispensary must still exist, I insisted. Even if sealed, it's part of the asylum's structure. Can you show me where it is? She hesitated, then nodded, a flicker of resolve, replacing her. Tara, yes, I can. It is beneath the west wing. As I said, there is a hidden passage from the old laundry room. Only a few of us knew of it. This was it. The direct path to the heart of St. Jude's darkness. A hidden dispensary, a secret passage, and the potential for residual evidence, even after a zealous purging. The thought filled me with a grim determination. The map of St. Jude's was indeed revealing its true, horrifying contours, and I was about to descend into its most hidden, and perhaps most dangerous, chamber. The questions were no longer what happened, but how deeply the evil ran, and what, if anything, could still be found. Are you still with me, brave readers? For we are about to delve into the very crucible, where the choir sang their final, fatal song, the flicker of resolve. In Sister Agnes's eyes was a fragile thing, easily extinguished. Yet, it was enough. Her tears, the raw grief for Amelia, had finally cracked the edifice of her blind faith. The hidden passage, she repeated, her voice still trembling but firming with each word, from the old laundry room. It's rarely used now. The Mother Superior was very careful to keep it secret. My pulse quickened. A hidden passage meant a clandestine operation, a deliberate attempt to conceal activities. This wasn't just a place of death. It was a stage for a meticulously orchestrated atrocity. "Show me," I urged, keeping my voice low and steady, to not alarm her further. "Now." She nodded, leading me out of my temporary office and deeper into the asylum's decaying heart. We moved through dimly lit corridors, past doors that remained perpetually shut, the air growing heavier with the scent of damp stone and stale linen. The silence here was different from the chapels. It was the silence of neglect, of disuse. Occasionally, we heard the faint, unsettling sounds of the asylum's residents, a distant moan, a low, tuneless hum sounds that underscored the desolate nature of this place. We reached a large, unkempt room filled with rusty washing tubs, ancient, mangled presses, and stacks of faded threadbare linens. The air here was heavy with the smell of old soap and mildew. It was clearly the old laundry room, long abandoned. In one corner, behind a towering stack of disused wooden crates, Sister Agnes pointed to a section of the wall. It looked unremarkable, just like the rest of the brickwork, but on closer inspection, I noticed a faint, almost invisible seam in the mortar, running vertically and horizontally. "Here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The lever is behind the loose brick. There." She indicated a specific brick near the bottom, barely distinguishable from its neighbors. I knelt, my fingers tracing the outline she'd described. Sure enough, with a slight pressure, the brick shifted inward. Behind it, a cold metallic lever awaited. I grasped it and pulled. With a low, grinding groan that sent dust motes dancing in the dim light, a section of the wall slowly slid inward, revealing a narrow, pitch-black opening. A wave of cold, stagnant air, carrying a faint, disturbing aroma that was sickly sweet and metallic, emanated from the darkness beyond. It was the same smell from the chapel, stronger here, more concentrated. "The dispensary," Sister Agnes breathed, a shudder passing through her frail body. "God, forgive us." I pulled out my small lantern, its beam cutting a hesitant path into the inky blackness. The passage was cramped, barely wide enough for one person, and led steeply downwards. The air was heavy, humid, and tasted of dust and something acrid. I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere in the depths. "Stay here, sister," I instructed, not wanting to expose her to further trauma, or worse, to whatever lingering dangers lay ahead. "If I am not back in an hour, seek out Elias Thorne in New Orleans. Tell him everything." It was a slim hope, but Thorne was the only other person who had shown even a flicker of integrity regarding St. Jude's. With a deep breath, I stepped into the passage, my lantern bobbing, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The descent was treacherous, the uneven floor slippery with dampness. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, the passage opened into a small, subterranean chamber. The air in the dispensary was thick and oppressive, saturated with the cloying, sweet, metallic aroma that now dominated my senses. It was a suffocating smell, a scent of death that clung to every surface. My lantern beam revealed a scene of chilling disarray. The room was clearly a makeshift laboratory, or rather, a workshop of death. On a heavy wooden table in center, amidst overturned beakers and spilled powders, stood several dark glass bottles, identical to what Sister Agnes had described. One was uncorked, and the faint bitter scent was undeniably strong here. I carefully picked up a nearby beaker. It was stained with a residue, and when I touched it, my fingers tingled, a faint burning sensation confirming my suspicions of a corrosive agent. There were also several shallow ceramic basins, crusted with dried residue, consistent with the description of the containers the choir members had stood in, and tucked into a corner, piled haphazardly, were bundles of coarse linen cloths, some still damp and stiff with the dried, dark stains of the purification solution. This was it, the undeniable, physical evidence of the Mother Superior's horrific scheme. My eyes scanned the rest of the room. On a shelf, I found a leather-bound journal, It was thick, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting, the Mother Superior's journal. My heart pounded as I opened it. The first few entries were mundane, spiritual reflections, asylum logistics. But then, the tone shifted. Pages detailing experiments with divine conductivity, spiritual frequencies, and the optimization of the sacred essence. She spoke of the mineral of light, and how its unique properties enhanced soul egress. She meticulously recorded the dosages, the exposure times, the observations of the patient's reactions, their increasing serenity and devotional fervor leading up to their ascension. It was a chillingly clinical account of a deranged mind, documenting mass murder with the precision of a scientist. My eyes fell on a chilling entry, dated just days before the choir's death, day 7 of the final purification cycle. The chorus, Sanctorum approaches apotheosis. The blend is perfected. The mineral amplifies the resonance beyond all previous measure. Their voices, truly, are becoming divine. The path to God's embrace will be swift, painless, and glorious. 53. Souls handpicked to lead the way, a testament to pure faith. Tomorrow, the final, perfect harmony. All will ascend. Praise be. A cold dread settled over me. This wasn't merely religious fanaticism. It was a megalomaniacal delusion, a horrific grand experiment to force divine ascension upon unwitting victims. She believed she was God's instrument, leading souls to salvation through poison. As I absorbed the horrific details, my lantern beam flickered, momentarily dimming. I cursed under my breath, shaking it slightly. The oil was running low. I needed to document this, to gather samples, and get out. Suddenly, a faint scraping sound came from the passage leading back to the laundry room. My blood ran cold. I froze, holding my breath, straining my ears. Had Sister Agnes followed me? Or had someone else discovered the secret entrance? The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the erratic thumping of my heart. And then, a distinct creak, like a footstep on the damp, uneven ground of the passage. I extinguished my lantern, plunging the dispensary into absolute darkness. The cloying sweet smell seemed to intensify, wrapping around me like a shroud. I pressed myself against the cold, rough-hewn wall, my hand instinctively going to the small, concealed knife I carried for emergencies. My eyes, accustomed to the gloom, strained to perceive any movement from the passage opening. A sliver of light appeared, growing slowly, then steadily. Not a lantern, but a small, steady flame, like a candle or a single oil wick. It cast long, distorted shadows that stretched into the chamber, momentarily illuminating the scattered bottles and basins before receding. A figure, tall and gaunt, emerged from the passage, their silhouettes stark against the faint light they carried. It wasn't Sister Agnes. The figure held themselves with an imposing, almost rigid posture. As they stepped fully into the dispensary, the weak light catching their face, my blood ran cold. It was Father Michael. His face, usually placid and benign, was contorted with a chilling blend of anger and something far more sinister, a cold, calculating resolve. In his hand, he held a heavy, iron poker. I knew someone would come sniffing around, he hissed, his voice a low, venomous whisper that belied his clerical garb. Dr. Beaumont is a coward, but he has his uses. Sister Agnes, however, she's always been weak. Too much sentiment for God's higher purpose. You found the truth, didn't you, Mr. Finch? The true path to ascension. His eyes gleamed in the flickering light, devoid of warmth, filled instead with a chilling, fanatic zeal. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had walked straight into a trap. This wasn't just a cover-up, it was an ongoing conspiracy. Father Michael wasn't merely a misguided believer. He was an accomplice, perhaps even a zealot, who continued the Mother Superior's horrifying work, and he had no intention of letting me leave. The darkness of St. Jude's had finally claimed me, and I wondered, dear reader, if this truly was the end of my investigation, lost forever in the depths of this asylum's unspeakable evil. The sudden, chilling revelation of Father Michael, his face twisted by a fanatic zeal and illuminated by the flickering, malevolent glow of his small lamp, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. My hand tightened on the hilt of my concealed knife. I had walked into a spider's web, and the spider, it seemed, was not merely Dr. Beaumont, but this seemingly pious priest. His words, "the true path to ascension," echoed the Mother Superior's deranged journal entries, confirming his deep complicity, his unwavering belief in the horrific purpose behind the massacre. "So, you're another one of her chosen observers," I stated, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands. I needed to buy time to assess my options in the suffocating darkness of the dispensary. The cloying, sweet smell of cyanide seemed to prickle my skin, a silent accomplice to the horror unfolding. Father Michael's thin lips curled into a mirthless smile. "Observer, more than that, Mr. Finch. I am a true disciple." The Mother Superior merely laid the groundwork, initiated the first glorious chorus. But the work of God, true salvation, is an ongoing process. Do you understand the profound grace she bestowed upon those souls? They did not die, cartographer. They were elevated. Their earthly shells merely shed, allowing their purified spirits to soar directly to the heavens, untouched by fire. His voice, though still a whisper, carried a chilling conviction, a dangerous certainty that bordered on madness. He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on me, gleaming with an unnerving intensity. The iron poker he held was raised slightly, catching the dim light. "You see the truth, don't you? Not the mundane earthly truth you seek to chart, but the divine, celestial truth." The Mother Superior understood the weakness of man, the corruption of the flesh. Only through true purification could souls be truly saved. "Purification by poison," I retorted, pushing back against his delusion. "You murdered 53 innocent people, Father, and you covered it up. This is not divine grace. It is depravity." His smile vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "Blasphemy. You, a mere cartographer of dirt and stone, dare to question the will of the Almighty, expressed through his chosen instruments. You defile this sacred place with your cynical rationality." He lunged, the iron poker whistling through the air, aimed directly at my head. I reacted instinctively, ducking under the blow and simultaneously shoving the heavy wooden table between us. Beakers clattered, bottles toppled, spilling more of the acrid-smelling purification solution onto the stone floor. The sweet, metallic stench intensified, burning my nostrils. Father Michael stumbled, his momentum carrying him into the table. "You won't understand," he snarled, righting himself, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. "But you will join them, a martyr to your own ignorance." Swung the poker again, this time aiming for my legs. I leaped back, narrowly avoiding the blow, the poker striking the wall with a sickening thud, sending flakes of plaster showering down. The tight confines of the dispensary were a disadvantage. I needed space, light, a way out. My only path was back through the narrow passage. But Father Michael, despite his age, was agile, fueled by a terrifying, righteous rage. He advanced, forcing me backward, deeper into the chamber. As I retreated, my foot caught on something. I glanced down. It was one of the bundles of linen cloths, still damp with the dried poison. An idea, desperate and dangerous, flashed through my mind. "Tell me, Father," I gasped, trying to keep him talking, to distract him. "What was the mineral of light? What did the Mother Superior truly discover?" He paused, a flicker of pride crossing his face, even in his murderous rage. "A gift from deep within the earth," as she said. "A phosphorescent rock, crushed to a fine powder and dissolved. It heightened the conductivity, Mr. Finch. It accelerated the spiritual current. It ensured the purity of the ascension. A miracle of God's own creation. A phosphorescent rock. My suspicions about radium, or some other radioactive material, solidified. Mixed with cyanide, it was a slow, agonizing death. The combination likely induced a state of semi-consciousness, even euphoria, before the final collapse, explaining the serene faces. This was truly a scientific perversion, cloaked in religious ecstasy. He lunged again, closer this time, the poker grazing my shoulder. I cried out, stumbling backward, but it was a feint. As he recovered, I seized my chance. With a desperate lunge, I grabbed a handful of the saturated linen cloths, ignoring the burning sensation on my skin, as Father Michael raised the poker for a final, decisive blow. I hurled the cloths directly at his face. He let out a choked cry, dropping the poker as the corrosive liquid splashed across his eyes and mouth. He staggered back, screaming, his hands clawing at his face, his body convulsing as the poison began to take effect. The sickeningly sweet smell, amplified by the commotion, filled the air, and his choked gasps quickly became ragged, wheezing sounds. This was my chance. I stumbled past his thrashing form, my heart pounding, and plunged back to the narrow, dark passage. I didn't dare look back, not wanting to see the full horror of his demise. The sounds of his struggles, his gurgling gasps, pursued me up the steep, winding path, until they mercifully faded into silence. I burst out into the old laundry room, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. Sister Agnes was still there, huddled in a corner, her face pale with fear. When she saw me, battered and disheveled, but alive, a wave of profound relief washed over her. "Mr. Finch, what happened?" she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Father Michael," I choked out, still gasping for air. "He was in on it. He tried to kill me." Her eyes widened in horror. Oh God, he truly was corrupted. I knew, I suspected. He had changed after the Mother Superior left. He spoke of continuing her holy work. "He won't be continuing anything now," I said grimly, rubbing my stinging shoulder. "The dispensary. It's full of the evidence, the bottles, the journal, and Father Michael." "We must leave," Sister Agnes urged, rising with a newfound urgency. "Before anyone else discovers it, before they realize, Father Michael is gone." She was right. The asylum was a nest of vipers, and I had stirred it. My initial mission was to expose the truth, but now, my immediate goal was survival. We needed to get out, and we needed to get this evidence to a legitimate authority. Someone beyond the reach of St. Jude's insidious influence. Thorne was the only one I could trust. "We go to New Orleans," I declared, my voice firm despite my exhaustion. "To Elias Thorne. He's the only one who might listen, and we take this." I pulled the Mother Superior's journal from my coat. Its grim contents now the ultimate proof of the horrors committed here, as we made our way through the asylum's silent corridors. Passing the locked doors behind which the remaining patients languished, I couldn't help but wonder how many more chorus sanctorum ceremonies had the Mother Superior planned, how many more unwitting souls had been slated for ascension, and how many other disciples like Father Michael remained within the walls of institutions like this, hidden in plain sight, continuing their horrific experiments in the name of God. The thought sent a fresh chill down my spine. The truth was out, but the fight, I knew, was far from over. The dark shadow of St. Jude's Asylum, and the evil it harbored, now stretched far beyond its decaying walls, threatening to engulf more than just a cartographer and a misguided nun. And I wondered, dear readers, if this unearthed horror would ever truly be brought to justice, or if its insidious influence would simply fester, hidden beneath the veneer of piety and institutional secrecy. The urgency in Sister Agnes's voice mirrored the frantic beat of my own heart, and hastened through the asylum's silent, oppressive corridors. The image of Father Michael, thrashing in his death throes, was seared into my mind, a chilling testament to the lethal nature of the Mother Superior's purification solution. We were no longer simply investigators. We were fugitives, carrying a truth so damning it threatened to unravel not just St. Jude's, but perhaps the very fabric of institutional trust in this isolated corner of Louisiana. The long, winding corridors, once just a maze to be mapped, now felt like a predatory beast's digestive tract, closing in around us. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, each distant moan from a patient seemed to echo with a deeper, more profound despair. Sister Agnes, surprisingly nimble, despite her earlier frailty, led the way, her wimple a pale flutter in the gloom. Her initial terror had morphed into a steely resolve, born, I suspected, from the crushing weight of her belated understanding. The locket, clutched in her hand, was no longer just a memento, but a sacred trust. "The main entrance is too risky," she whispered, her voice tight with suppressed fear. "The night staff, they are loyal to the institution. They might question us." Her gaze flickered to the Mother Superior's journal, tucked securely under my arm. "There's an old service exit, near the kitchens, seldom used after dark." We navigated through the labyrinthine service areas, the air growing heavy with the faint sense of stale food and cooking grease. The kitchens were deserted, pots and pans hanging silently, reflecting the moonlight filtering through grimy windows. The service exit was a heavy, bolted wooden door, leading directly into an overgrown thicket bordering the asylum grounds. With a collective heave, we managed to slide the heavy bolts back. The hinges groaned in protest, a sound that seemed deafening in the still night. We slipped out, the cool night air, a welcome, if short-lived, balm after the suffocating oppressiveness of the asylum. The grounds were a tangle of wild growth, tall grasses and thorny bushes obscuring a faint, used path. The moon, a thin crescent, offered little light, and the towering cypress trees cast long spectral shadows that danced with every whisper of the wind. "New Orleans is too far to walk tonight," I muttered, pushing aside a thorny branch. My shoulder, where the poker had grazed me, throbbed. "Do you know of any nearby settlements? A stable, perhaps, where we could procure horses?" Sister Agnes pointed vaguely towards the west, beyond the dense line of trees. "There's an old trapper's cabin, perhaps 5 miles from here, abandoned for years. But there used to be a small stable nearby, for river traffic. We could rest there until dawn, then try to find passage downriver." It was a desperate plan, but our only option. The thought of spending another moment near St. Jude's, with the knowledge of what festered within its walls, was unbearable. We moved quickly, stumbling through the uneven terrain, the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth doing little to calm our nerves. The distant, faint glow of the asylum, swallowed by the darkness of the bayou, slowly receded behind us, a malevolent eye watching our escape. We reached the trapper's cabin just before the moon dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with the faint, ethereal glow of pre-dawn. The cabin was dilapidated, its wooden walls leaning precariously, its roof a patchwork of holes. But it offered shelter. The stable, a crumbling shed nearby, was empty of horses, but the musty smell of straw lingered, a reminder of its former purpose. Inside the cabin, huddled against the damp cold, I pulled out the Mother Superior's journal. The flickering light from our small, remaining lantern cast long shadows as I began to read aloud, Sister Agnes listening with a rapt, horrified attention. We needed to understand the full scope of this madness, to arm ourselves with every detail. Before facing Thorn, the journal revealed the Mother Superior's escalating delusion. Her initial experiments were on small animals, testing the mineral's conductivity and the solution's purity. Then, on the most unresponsive patients, those deemed beyond earthly redemption, using them as unwilling test subjects for her twisted form of salvation. She meticulously documented their reactions, the serenity that often preceded death, the beatific expressions as they succumbed. Her chilling disregard for human life was terrifying in its cold, scientific detachment, masked by the fervent language of faith. She called them her unworthy vessels. Sister Agnes interjected, her voice trembling. Those patients, she said, were too far gone for earthly healing. They were to be offered the swiftest path to grace. Her eyes were wide with a fresh wave of nausea. The depth of the deception, the layers of lies that had concealed such depravity, were truly staggering. And she sought out those with powerful voices, I continued. Reading from an entry describing the formation of the chorus sang, she believed that collective, harmonious sound would act as a spiritual conduit, drawing the purified souls upwards, a celestial siren call. It was a horrifying symphony of death. The journal also hinted at outside connections, veiled references. Two benefactors who shared her vision and supplied the rare mineral and the sacred compounds. This wasn't an isolated incident, a singular madwoman's delusion. There was a network, a larger conspiracy, preying on the vulnerable under the guise of piety. Who are these benefactors? Sister Agnes murmured, her voice laced with fear. Duh, she'll name them. I scanned the pages, but found no names, only cryptic references to the brethren and the conclave of pure light. More cultish secrecy, more layers of concealment. This rabbit hole went far deeper than a single asylum, just as the first sliver of dawn painted the sky outside the cabin window. A sound cut through the stillness of the bayou, the distinct thud of hooves on damp earth, growing steadily louder. We froze, exchanging terrified glances. Had they discovered our escape already? Had someone followed us? The sound grew closer, accompanied by the muffled voices of men. Not one, or two, but several. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through my exhaustion. We were exposed, vulnerable, miles from any real help. I extinguished the lantern, plunging the cabin into near darkness, hoping the rising dawn wouldn't betray us. Hide, I whispered to Sister Agnes, pointing to a small, rotted cupboard in the corner. Quickly. She scrambled inside, pulling the door shut behind her. I stood near the cabin's single, grimy window, staring out into the pale light. 3 figures, mounted on horseback, emerged from the tree line, their silhouettes stark against the burgeoning dawn. They were dressed in dark, unidentifiable clothing, but their posture was menacing, their intent clear. They moved with a chilling, professional silence, their gaze sweeping the landscape. One of them dismounted, holding up something small and metallic. Even from this distance, through the dim light, I recognized it, Amelia's locket. He held it up, examining it, before gesturing towards the cabin. They had tracked us, and they were here. My breath hitched. They had found the locket, perhaps near the asylum gates, or dropped by Sister Agnes in her haste. It was a clear signpost. The asylum's secrets, it seemed, were fiercely guarded, and the forces protecting them were far more organized and ruthless than I had imagined. My heart pounded with a desperate urgency. The journal, the proof of their atrocities, was my only bargaining chip. But what chance did a single cartographer and a terrified nun have against such determined, ruthless pursuers? This was no longer just an investigation. It was a desperate flight for survival, the weight of 53 dead souls, resting squarely on my shoulders. And I wondered, dear readers, if this unholy choir, silenced in death, would ever truly find justice in a world so intent on burying its darkest truths. The dawn, it seemed, brought not solace, but a terrifying new chapter of dread. The sight of Amelia's locket in the hand of one of our pursuers sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. They hadn't just discovered our escape, they had tracked us, using the small, intimate relic of a victim as their guide. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. The 3 riders, now dismounted and fanning out, moved in predatory silence, their dark forms coalescing from the pre-dawn gloom. They were not common thugs. Their calculated movements spoke of training, of a chilling professionalism. "Stay still, sister," I whispered, my voice barely a breath, as I pressed myself further into the shadows of the crumbling cabin. Sister Agnes, huddled in the cramped cupboard, made no sound, a testament to her terror. The Mother Superior's journal, clutched in my hand, felt like both a burden and a weapon. One of the men, broader than the others, approached the cabin, his gaze sweeping the dilapidated exterior. The cabin's neglect was a flimsy disguise, offering little concealment. He stopped directly in front of the window where I stood, his face obscured by the low light, but his intent palpable. He raised his hand, and I braced myself, expecting a shouted command, a warning. Instead, he simply tapped twice on the window pane, a soft, deliberate sound that resonated with menace. "Mr. Finch," a low, gravelly voice cut through the silence, calm and chillingly composed. "We know you are in there, and we know what you possess." My blood ran cold. They knew my name. They knew about the journal. This wasn't a random pursuit. It was a targeted hunt. The Brethren and the conclave of pure light were clearly more extensive and more dangerous than I had initially imagined. "Come out, and no harm will come to thee." "Sister," the voice continued, smooth as polished stone, yet utterly devoid of warmth. "We merely wish to retrieve what is rightfully ours. A misunderstanding, nothing more. A misunderstanding that involved 53 murders and a zealous priest trying to brain me with a poker." I held my breath, assessing my options. This was a direct confrontation, not a chance encounter. They were here for the journal, for the secrets it contained. "Who are you?" I demanded, projecting my voice as best I could through the grimy glass. A soft chuckle, devoid of humor, answered me. "Let us say, Mr. Finch, we are the custodians of a certain spiritual truth, a truth that requires a delicate touch, and your methods, while perhaps well-intentioned, are quite disruptive." "Your truth murdered 53 people," I countered, my voice hardening. "I have proof, a detailed account of every chemical, every victim, every step of the Mother Superior's depravity." The man outside sighed, a sound of weary patience. "A distorted perception, I assure you. The Mother Superior was a visionary, and her work, while perhaps unconventional to the uninitiated, was for the greater good. Those souls were granted a singular privilege, and you enable this privilege," I pressed, hoping to bait him, "to learn more about this sinister organization. We facilitate the advancement of certain esoteric sciences," he replied, his voice still unnervingly calm, "for the benefit of mankind's spiritual evolution, and your continued interference poses a risk to that noble endeavor." His tone sharpened, losing its presence of calm. "Now, Mr. Finch, be reasonable. Hand over the journal and the locket, and we will leave you and the good sister to your pursuits unharmed." He was trying to lull me into a false sense of security, to make me believe I had a choice. But the presence of 3 armed men in the pre-dawn bayou, tracking us with grim determination, told a different story. Surrender meant silence, permanently. "I will not," I stated firmly. "This journal goes to the authorities. The world deserves to know what happened at St. Jude's." A moment of silence, tense and pregnant with unspoken threats. Then, the man outside chuckled again, a dry, humorless sound. "A pity. We had hoped to avoid unnecessary unpleasantness. But it seems some lessons must be learned, ... more forcefully." He stepped back, raising a hand. The other 2 riders dismounted, drawing long, glinting blades. Not firearms, I noted, but silent, deadly steel. They were planning to take me alive, or at least, without attracting undue attention with gunshots. A chill ran down my spine. "They're coming in," I whispered to Sister Agnes, who let out a faint whimper from her hiding place. "Stay hidden. Whatever happens, do not make a sound." I scrambled back from the window, looking for any advantage. The cabin was small, crumbling, with only one exit. My knife, small and designed for utility rather than combat, felt pitifully inadequate against 3 determined assailants with long blades. But I had the journal. That was my leverage. The sound of splintering would fill the cabin as the men kicked in the flimsy door. They burst in, cloaked figures against the faint light of dawn, their blades glinting ominously. The man who had spoken, clearly their leader, held a lantern, its light swinging wildly, illuminating the desolate interior of the cabin. "The journal, Mr. Finch," the leader commanded, his voice now devoid of its earlier composure, edged with steel, and the locket. I stood my ground, holding the journal up like a shield. "You won't get it," I declared, my voice wavering slightly, but holding firm, not without a fight. One of the men lunged, his blade flashing. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding a thrust that would have skewered me. The cabin was too small, too cramped. I feigned a move towards the door, hoping to draw them out, but the leader anticipated it, blocking my path. They moved with practiced coordination, encircling me. I parried a thrust with the hard cover of the journal, the impact jarring my arm. They were toying with me, confident in their numbers and skill. The leader watched, his face impassive, as his subordinates moved in for the kill. Just as one of them lunged again, a desperate idea sparked in my mind. The old, rusty stove in the corner. It was filled with dry wood, and a half-burnt wick lay inside. "You want the truth," I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "Then you'll have to destroy it yourself." With a sudden burst of speed, I darted towards the stove, pulling out the small bottle of lantern oil from my coat. The leader's eyes widened. "Stop him," he roared, his composure finally breaking. But I was already there. I threw open the stove door, uncorked the oil, and poured it over the dry wood and papers inside, the sickly sweet smell mingling with the odor of fuel. Then, with a frantic, trembling hand, I grabbed the half-burnt wick, and with a desperate prayer, ignited it with the last flicker of my lantern. The flames caught immediately, roaring to life within the stove, casting an orange glow across the faces of my attackers. "The truth dies with me," I yelled, brandishing the journal, "unless you let me go." The leader's face was a mask of fury, but also, for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear. The destruction of the journal was a risk he hadn't anticipated. It was their ultimate leverage, their most dangerous secret. He hesitated, clearly weighing the cost of seizing me against the irreversible loss of the evidence. "Stop him," one of the other men shouted, moving forward, but the leader held up a hand, stopping him. His gaze was fixed on me, and then, ominously, on the small cupboard where Sister Agnes was hidden. "The journal, Mr. Finch, or the sister suffers. Your choice." His voice was low, devoid of negotiation, a chilling ultimatum. My heart plummeted. They knew about Sister Agnes. They had seen her. My desperate gamble had cornered me, forcing an impossible choice. The truth, or the life, of a woman who had finally found the courage to expose it. The flames in the stove roared, a hungry maw, ready to consume the horrifying testament of St. Jude's. The cold light of dawn was now a harsh, unforgiving glare, illuminating my terrible dilemma. And I wondered, dear readers, what choice you would make in the face of such unspeakable evil, when your own life, and the lives of those you sought to protect, hung in the balance. The price of truth, it seemed, was steeper than I had ever imagined. The roaring flames and the stove cast dancing, grotesque shadows across the cabin, illuminating the grim tableau. 3 silent, menacing figures, the Mother Superior's journal, clutched in my trembling hand, and Sister Agnes hidden, terrified, in the old cupboard. The leader's ultimatum, delivered with chilling calm, echoed in the small space. "The journal, Mr. Finch, or the sister suffers. Your choice. Your choice. My mind raced, a whirlwind of desperate calculations. To surrender the journal was to condemn 53 souls to an eternity of forgotten injustice. To allow the monstrous conclave of pure light to continue their depraved ascensions unchecked. To refuse was to sacrifice Sister Agnes, a woman who, despite her misguided faith, had bravely helped me uncover this horror. The weight of human lives, both past and present, pressed down on me. Suffocating, my eyes darted from the burning stove to the cupboard, then to the unyielding faces of my attackers. They were waiting, utterly patient in their malevolence. The choice was not merely between justice and a life, but between an abstract truth and a tangible, immediate consequence. And then, a memory, sharp and poignant, pierced through the chaos. Amelia's locket. The sweet, sorrowful eyes of the young woman whose voice had been silenced by this very evil. Her story, and the stories of the others, deserved to be told, but not at the cost of another innocent life. You have my word, I said, my voice hoarse, but firm. Let Sister Agnes go, and I will hand over the journal. The leader's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion in their depth. Your word is worth little, Mr. Finch. Send the woman out first, then the journal. I hesitated. This was a treacherous game. There was no guarantee they would honor their end of the bargain, but I had no other leverage. Sister Agnes, I called out, my voice resonating with a plea. Come out. They will let you go. A moment of agonizing silence, then the cupboard door creaked open. Sister Agnes emerged, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with terror, but also with a newfound, fragile courage. She looked at me, a silent question in her gaze. They promise your safety, I said, trying to convey reassurance I didn't feel. She nodded slowly, then walked forward, her steps faltering slightly, but determined. As she passed me, she pressed something small and cold into my hand. It was Amelia's locket. Her silent message was clear. Remember them. Don't let their deaths be in vain. The leader watched Sister Agnes closely. She will be taken to a safe place, he stated, his voice flat. A place where she can reflect on her transgressions against the faith. It was a thinly veiled thread of reindoctrination, perhaps even a new form of incarceration. But she was alive, as two of the men moved to escort Sister Agnes from the cabin. I felt a fresh wave of despair. The journal, the proof, was about to be lost. But then, as the leader stepped forward to receive it, my gaze fell on the burning stove. The flames roared, consuming the oil-soaked kindling. The solution was desperate, perhaps suicidal, but it was the only way to ensure the truth, even if incomplete, might one day see the light. You want the journal? I asked, my voice suddenly strong, resonant with a grim resolve. Then you'll have to take it from the fire. Before he could react, with a primal yell, I hurled the heavy, leather-bound journal directly into the heart of the roaring flames. The leader let out a choked cry of rage and disbelief. He lunged for the stove, thrusting his bare hands into the inferno, desperate to retrieve the burning pages. The acrid smell of scorching leather and paper filled the cabin, mingling with the sickening sweet scent of the lingering poison. He screamed, pulling back his hands, now blistered and smoking, the journal irretrievably consumed. You fool, he roared, his face contorted with fury. You have destroyed centuries of knowledge, the divine truth. You destroyed lives, I countered, my chest heaving. And now, your lies will burn with it. His eyes, wide with a terrifying, unbridled rage, fixed on me. You will pay for this, Mr. Finch. You will suffer for your defiance. The conclave has long arms. He lunged, his remaining hand reaching for my throat, but the commotion had drawn attention. The sound of shouting, distant but growing louder, echoed from the direction of the main road. The distinct clip-clop of more horses, and then a desperate, reedy voice that I instantly recognized. Elias Thorne. He had somehow followed us, or perhaps Sister Agnes had had the foresight to send a message before we left. The leader froze, his head snapping towards the sounds. His eyes, burning with hatred, darted between me and the rapidly approaching sounds. His subordinates, too, looked alarmed. Their meticulously planned, silent operation was unraveling. "Retrieve the woman." The leader barked at his remaining men. "We must go." He cast one last, venomous look at me, a promise of retribution in his gaze. "This is not over, Finch. You have merely delayed the inevitable." With that, he turned, and with his men, mounted their horses and galloped away into the rapidly brightening dawn, disappearing back into the bayou, leaving behind only the acrid smell of burnt paper and the lingering stench of poison. I stood there, gasping, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The flames in the stove flickered, dying down, leaving only smoldering embers and the acrid smell of burnt parchment. The journal, the irrefutable proof, was gone. Minutes later, Elias Thorne burst into the cabin, breathless, flanked by 2 armed local constables. His eyes, wide with a mix of terror and relief, swept over the chaotic scene. "Mr. Finch, are you all right? Sister Agnes? We followed your tracks." A message arrived at the department office, vaguely hinting at danger. "And then we found the locket, by the asylum gates," Thorne explained, his voice stammering, before seeing the smoldering stove. "The journal, you burned it." I nodded, utterly spent. They were going to kill Sister Agnes. It was the only way. Sister Agnes, miraculously, was found unharmed, having slipped away from her captors in the chaos of their panicked retreat. Her testimony, combined with Thorne's official position, and the remnants of the dispensary which I later led them to, confirming the presence of cyanide residue and phosphorescent traces, provided enough evidence to launch a full investigation. The St. Jude's Asylum for the Infirm and Spiritually Bereft was immediately shut down. Dr. Beaumont, interrogated under duress, confessed to a limited knowledge of the Mother Superior's true intentions, revealing her charismatic hold over the staff in the powerful, unseen conclave of pure light that protected her. He painted a picture of a calculated, insidious cult, preying on the vulnerable and those society had discarded. The Mother Superior was never found. She had vanished, leaving no trace, a phantom of pure evil. The conclave remained largely in the shadows, its influence hinted at, but never fully exposed. There was no grand judicial justice, no public trial for the Mother Superior, no complete dismantling of the shadowy organization that supported her. The local authorities, overwhelmed and unnerved by the esoteric nature of the crime, preferred to contain the scandal rather than fully unravel it. The narrative they chose was one of a deranged superintendent, a singular act of madness, not a widespread conspiracy. The story of the choir that sang themselves to death became a chilling local legend, whispered in hushed tones, a cautionary tale. Some said their voices still echoed through the bayou on moonless nights, a mournful lament for souls unjustly taken. My cartographer's map of St. Jude's was never formally completed. Instead, it became a map of a different kind, a grim chronicle of human depravity, marked by invisible lines of fear, secrecy, and profound loss. The Mother Superior's journal, though incinerated, had imprinted its dark truth upon my mind. A burden I would carry forever. The lasting impact of this horror reverberated far beyond the decaying walls of St. Jude's. It was a stark reminder of the dark side of humanity, of how easily evil can cloak itself in piety, how institutional secrecy can become a tomb for truth, and how the echoes of buried history can haunt the present. The conclave of pure light remained a lingering mystery, a chilling whisper of an organization that still operated in the shadows, its members, perhaps, continuing their ascensions elsewhere. The memory of the chorus, Sanctorum, 53 voices, silenced by a perverse interpretation of faith, serves as a poignant, cautionary tale for us all. It compels us to ask, what truths do we ourselves allow to be buried under layers of convenient narratives and institutional comfort? What evils do we tacitly permit by our silence, by our refusal to question what seems too difficult or too unsettling to confront? And how many more unholy choirs are still singing themselves to death, hidden from plain sight in the forgotten corners of the world, awaiting someone brave enough to listen to their final, tragic song? The fight for truth, my friends, is never truly over. It is a continuous call to vigilance, a plea from the silenced to never forget, to never forget.